From Carr, Riggs, and Ingram, this is It Figures, the CRI podcast, an accounting, advisory, and industry-focused podcast for business and organization leaders, entrepreneurs, and anyone who is looking to go beyond the status quo.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of It Figures, a CRI podcast. My name is Sandy Guy, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today as we explore empathetic leadership with two leaders from our Atlanta office, two of my favorite leaders, both Kendra and Max Jen. So I wanted to take a moment and welcome my guests and let them introduce themselves. Kendra, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, Sandy. Good afternoon or morning, I guess, whenever you listen to it. My name is Kendra LaFleur, and I am a senior manager in the Atlanta office.
Nice. And she looks lovely today, even though nobody can see her. She looks awesome. And Max?
Hey, everyone. I'm Max Jen, and I am the tax partner at the CRI and focus on the real estate practice, and I'm also in the Atlanta office. Just a floor below Kendra.
There you go. Max looks lovely too, by the way. So he's dressed very nice, even though it's an audio podcast, just so they both get credit. They're all dressed very professionally today. So, I particularly wanted to spend today talking about empathetic leadership, because obviously it's a trending topic right now. And I read something interesting the other day that I thought might be a great way for us to start our discussion. And it was this cool analogy that sort of differentiates empathy, sympathy, and apathy, and as it relates to leadership styles. So imagine for a second that you fell into a hole. An apathetic leader would say, "What are you doing in the hole? Get out. We got work to do." A sympathetic leader says, "I'm so sorry you're in that hole." Whereas an empathetic leader jumps in the hole with you and says, "Let's get you out of here. How can I help you?" And that was really eye-opening for me. And it's made me self-reflect a little bit. I don't think I tell people, "What are you doing in the hole?" But I have to sit there and think, do I ever tell people, "Man, I'm sorry you're in the hole"? But I'm curious, Max, have you ever had an experience with a lead where either it was an apathetic leader or empathetic that really made a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the analogy, and sometimes I was thinking, the message that you were saying that, being empathy is definitely not the attitude that we want in the office. But also sometimes I feel like that toughness can drive us as well. So, listening to you and thinking of an example, I remember early in my career, I think maybe my second tax season, and I was sick at the deadline day. And the senior associate that I worked with actually wanted to talk to the tax partner in charge, and basically said, "Max probably need to go home because he's not, looking too great. And he probably doesn't want me to spread the germs around the office as well." So I completely understand that. And I was walking down the hallway, and the partner saw me, and he put his arm around my shoulder, and he said, "Today's the deadline. Do you think you can suck it up and do it for the team?" So at that time, it worked for me. I was thinking, okay, I shouldn't feel sorry for myself. I need to push and get it done. And also that experience actually carried me throughout my career to know that, what it takes to deliver to the client. But the bottom line is, I feel like a lot of time is maybe he wasn't being empathetic. It's just, he knows that maybe I need that push. And so a lot of time, I think what we need to understand is, your audience and the timing and also the tone of how it was communicated.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't take credit for the analogy. I will be honest and say and Kendra knows I love TikTok. So there is a former Big Four. I think she was a senior when she left Big Four. And she's on TikTok and she has a blog and she wrote this book, and it was her analogy. And it's interesting, Max, because some of the examples when she goes through her experience is very similar to what you articulated, that, it was a deadline, or there was a client deadline or something going on. And basically the response that she got, sometimes direct and sometimes not quite as direct, was basically, suck it up, do what you got to do. So Kendra, you're in audit. I'm curious, have you had any similar experiences?
Yeah, many times, many times. What comes to mind for me is when I had my first child, actually. It was busy season, long hours. And at that time, I was really young in my career. And with public accounting, I felt like I always had to work with everybody else work. I needed to be in the office until 10, 11 o'clock at night. I needed to get there early. I needed to just kind of suck it up, that sort of thing. And so, and so I've kind of experienced all three levels: apathy, sympathy, and empathy. I would have people say, dang, you got a kid at home, not to be malicious. It was just kind of like, dang, that sucks. It's kind of one of those things. And then I had some colleagues of mine who were also moms at different firms. And they were like, oh my gosh, I totally understand. Like, it's heartbreaking, and I feel for you. And that's kind of where that was. And ironic enough, one of the partners, I guess it was starting to wear on me, just getting home late. My kid was always asleep because she was 6 months at the time. And, it's the first time mom. You just kind of want to be there. And so one of the partners who I'm so close with, he pulled me into his office and was like, how are you doing? Just that typical question. And I just fell apart, And then in that moment, I think that he really understood kind of what I was going through. And then we kind of worked a way to where, I could, telecommute a couple of days a week. At that time, it wasn't as popular as it is now. And I didn't feel guilty about it. And he just really showed me so much empathy and just really just trying to understand kind of all of the psychological issues. I have them anyway, but that was just a whole other layer of just kind of what I was going through.
It's interesting as you were saying that, because you and I, especially over the last year, have talked a lot. And I was having a moment, because I don't have kids, where I'm like, gosh, have I ever done that to her? Because you've heard me say, one of the reasons why I don't have kids is I see what people go through when they do, and I don't want to work that hard. That's a lot of work 24/7. But it's interesting, because those are, I'll say, one-off situations and or individual situations that have happened to you, whether it was, Max when he was younger and it was a deadline, or Kendra and her first child. But why this has really been on my mind, and what I really wanted to talk about today, was when we look back over the past year, gosh, it's been such a long year, but during the pandemic, it has been very challenging for us, because you have people going through so much, the fear, the concern. They may have a parent or a child or themselves who had COVID, or, they have somebody who is high risk in their family, or they're high risk. You have all these things going on. But at the same time, we're a necessary business, and we still had to work. And so when Max was sick at a deadline when he was younger, well, okay, we can have a tax senior who's very ill, and we don't want him to take out the whole tax department. So let's send him home for the day, and we'll have some other people pick up the slack. Well, during the pandemic, it's not like we could send everybody home for a year. And so what's really been on my mind is, when you're in a situation like that, when everybody's kind of going through the same thing, but in different ways, but the work still has to get done. Like, how do you, Max, you were talking about this so well a minute ago, that the work still has to get out the door. And how do you show empathy, yet encourage, if that's the word I'm looking for people to get the work out the door. So, looking back over the last year, I'm curious. I'll start with just you personally, not you as a leader of teams, but what's the last year been like for you? I so remember when it was like, okay, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And, we were like, this will be 2 weeks. It's going to stink, but we're going to knock this out. And then life's going to be back to normal. And hello, here we are. So I'm curious, Max, the last year for you personally, what's that been like?
Yeah, it's definitely been tough. For our industry as a whole, we definitely got more workload on top of the pandemic, the childcare issue. I do have a 6 years old, but I'm very lucky that my wife was the main caretaker, while she was doing e-learning at home. So I would still be able to focus at work. And luckily, a lot of our clients do understand our situation because they're in the same situation as well. So the bottom line to me is communication is the key. Communication to the client, communication to the team, understanding what is the expectation, setting a clear expectations, and then communicate throughout the along the way. Was one of the big pieces that we learned from this pandemic.
So Kendra, I'm curious again, just because you and I have talked so much over the last year. I know you also brilliantly decided to add a puppy to your mix with your kids and everything. So I'm curious, what it's been like for you, and also, leading an audit team, which can be a very diverse group because for different clients, you have different folks. So I'm curious, talk to me a little bit high level, what the last year has been like for you.
Okay, first let's talk about this puppy. The only reason we got a puppy is because my daughter asked for a sister, and I said, not happening. We're going to get a dog. so let's just throw that out there, okay? It's not like I wanted a dog.
Are you second guessing that decision though now?
Every day I second guess that decision. But that's kind of how the puppy came to be. But I'd rather have a puppy than a kid. So, well, that came out wrong. I'd rather have a puppy than another kid. I guess I should say.
I have 2 dogs. I understand exactly what you meant with that comment.
Yeah, so it's a lot of work. But for me, I have always been really good at connecting with people. And so with my team, I've always had really good relationships with them personally. Like I knew, if there were upcoming weddings, I knew about kids, I knew about, people, maybe they are a caregiver of their parents or whatever. I just kind of knew a lot of things that kind of happened behind the scenes. And so for me, I was just kind of able to navigate this past year because I knew what they had going on at home. I knew that, you have these 2 kids and you're a single mom. I understand that. And so I was able to kind of, shuffle some stuff around. It was such a team effort. And I think particularly the Atlanta audit team, we're such a family, and so where you can't, complete something, I'll step in and I'll take it over. Like I'm not above any level of work. If I have to, do some auditing of cash, I'm going to do it because I know if I can just kind of ease that burden, it's worth it, And they do the same thing for me because I have 3 kids at home and it sucked. It sucked so bad. Unlike Max, he had a wife at home. I didn't have a wife, Max. I had a husband. And he didn't even know the password to log into some things. So it was just hard. It was just such a team effort. And so I'm just kind of grateful for that. And it's just, I think it's really important to know your team, know who you work with. So you kind of know what's going on in their lives. And so you can kind of adjust where needed.
I'm curious. I have one of those husbands too, by the way, Kendra. I mean, I'm like, walk a dog one day, just do me a favor, walk the dog, anyway, that's another podcast right there. So as I look back and think about some of the calls I would get from partners or other leaders who I'll say were trying to be empathetic and they knew or were concerned about their team and the dynamic that was different. Normally you walk into the break room and you're getting coffee and you might see a team member who maybe isn't smiling or whatever. And you have a chance to go, hey, you doing okay today? How's everything going? And a lot of them were really concerned that, they're remote, so I don't see them and I don't know what's going on. And as somebody who's been working remote for 5 years, I'm like, you just pick up the phone. And luckily we have video phones and we have Zoom and all these great tools. But I'm curious how in this different type of dynamic, either one of you have thoughts on the best way to kind of have that visual or that way to check in on your team to make sure everybody's doing okay. And then how to offer a solution when you can't take the fear away. You can't, if somebody's family is sick, you can't fix that problem, so to speak, but how do you stay connected and then navigate through that?
So what we do, and I want to echo to Kendra's point earlier, is that I'm also very lucky that I work with my team for a period of time already, so I know all of them. I know, understand, what their needs are, because everybody has different needs, and so you have to really understand our audience to address, their needs. And so what we have is every week we still host a Zoom meeting. Zoom has been a definitely a plus during the pandemic, so that we can see each other through video. And then also we did a Zoom happy hour with trivia questions. And also we also have one of the team member kindly open their backyard for us to get together during the pandemic, and we have lunch in a safe environment and be able to see each other in person. That definitely helped, because we all needed that, each other's support.
I think that's great, Max. I think that it helps when you have those good relationships, because then you just kind of tap into what's already there. But then for the situations where maybe you don't feel comfortable going out, and there were a lot of people like that, they just weren't up to it, and that's totally fine, and it's understandable. And so I know for me, like, even if you aren't, I do a lot of work with non-for-profits, and so we kind of have the non-for-profit team. But I'm, again, connected with so many people across different industry lines, and so it's really just checking in, and you'd be surprised by just saying, "Hey, how's it going?" Some of the responses that you'll get, I've said that, and it has turned into a whole, "Give me a call, let's talk about it." And I love that. I love that they feel comfortable enough to talk to me about certain things. And then I think it's important to say, how can I help? Sometimes people want to take some time off, but they don't want to ask for it because they don't want you to, they want to feel guilty about it. But you'd be surprised by just saying, how can I help? How can we, get you through whatever it is you're going through? And you typically, they kind of have an idea of what would help. And so when you open up that floor for them, I think that you'd be surprised at some of the honest responses that you get back.
Yeah, I'd like to say to both of you, welcome to my career, because I will say it's especially, I love that we have, even before the pandemic, we have the Cisco video phones. And so there have been so many times, and one that stands out, where an individual called me to talk about something work related, but I could just see in her face like something wasn't right. And before we even started, I said, "How are you? Are you okay?" And she just stopped and burst into tears and was telling me all about an issue that they were having, with somebody senior to her in her group. And just because I asked her, "How are you?" we became aware of a huge problem that nobody was talking about, and we could come in and resolve that. But if I had just said, that casual, "Hey, how you doing?" and moved on, but it was a sincere, "No, how are you? Okay, how are you?" And I'll say, for me, I've had, there's an Atlanta partner, Kathy Gottlieb, who happened to, call me one morning, and she's like, "How are you?" And I'm like, "I'm fine. Why are you asking?" And then I'm like, "Actually, I'm having a terrible morning." And like, just having somebody to talk to. Oftentimes, Kendra, you said it so well when you said, "How can I help?" That's the empathy of, you're in a hole. How can I get you out? And oftentimes when people ask me, "How can I help?" I'm like, just have a fun, let's just tell jokes, and let's have a fun conversation, or let me just get it out. I don't need you to fix anything. I just need to get it out. But when both of you were talking about that, and Kendra, especially when you were connecting, a lot of my day is spent with people calling with things they're going through, whether it's, they have a family member who's ill and they're trying to navigate the healthcare system, or they're going through some of the things that we've been going through socially in the world, and they're stressed out and call. And, my job is that safe place to talk about anything you want to talk about, and it stays there. But, some days when you get that a lot and you have your own stress, at the end of the day, you have that. If you're empathetic, I always say you wear that. So if you spend a day hearing people talk about their challenges, you're taking that on because you're being the person to be there and be a resource for them. And this is why self-care is so important, especially for people who are empathetic in a leadership role. So I'm curious, knowing that Max, although he has a wife that apparently we need, Kendra, although, he felt he had great help with his child, it's still very stressful because he has a team. I'm sure at times was worried about his children, but you're kind of taking all that on and the stress going on at work, and then Kendra with everything with y'all. So I'm curious, did either of you have those moments where you're like, okay, I'm trying to be that leader and I'm trying to be positive and helpful and empathetic, but man, I need a break? Or I just, how do you keep that game face on, I guess, being authentic, but keep that game face on? Did either one of you, maybe it's just me, but did either one of you have those moments?
Absolutely. I mean, it's been tough for everyone. And luckily, I think, being empathetic is not within a team, is not just the effort from the leader. I think it should be encouraged by the whole team and everybody, participate in that. So it was nice that actually, I had a lot of many individual phone calls with my teammates, and they were also very nice to often call me and check on me as well. And they will say, how are you doing, Max? What can we do to help you? I know you have a heavy load as well, and I know you have a kid at home. So what can we do? So it was definitely both ways. It wasn't just me giving, but I also was, on the receiving side as well. So I'm really thankful to have such a great team that I'm working with.
Did either one of you have a situation where, I mentioned earlier, I don't have kids and so many people do. And, I can't imagine being home and having a child who's school age and you're having to homeschool and meet your deadlines and like do all this. I can't imagine. So I think I can be empathetic, even if I can't personally relate to somebody's situation. But did either of you have a situation where somebody was going through something that you just couldn't relate to, yet you were empathetic?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of fun that you asked that. But so I have my husband and I have 3 kids. And so my house is full of people and it's just hustle bustle, moving, so much going on. But then I had a coworker where they live alone. And so they were going through like depression because they couldn't go out, it's just work. And they just didn't know how to cope, that anxiety, no family here. And so it was just a lot. And so I was definitely, I understood what they were saying, but I couldn't relate to it because I got too many people in my house. You want to take some of mine. You want a kid, take it. And so, but excuse me, but I definitely understand what that must be like. And yeah, you can FaceTime and Zoom and that sort of thing, but you can't touch anyone. That feeling of connection, you just don't have it. Whereas my kid, as annoying as he or she may be, they can run up and give me a hug, and it's just comforting. And so I just couldn't imagine kind of going through that where I was in the house, an apartment of however square feet, just by myself. I couldn't relate to it, but I definitely could understand and could feel for them, but just couldn't personally relate to it.
That's real interesting. You use that as an example. And there were so many people in the pandemic in that situation, especially when you think of college students that, moved to a city and started their new job in an accounting firm where maybe they didn't know a ton of people in that city. And then bam, you're kind of alone and isolated. And it's interesting because we're recording this during Mental Health Awareness Month. And where there's been a lot of studies coming out about the impact of that isolation and how much that human connection, whether even it's virtual over a video like we're doing right now, or in person, just how much that helps your mental health. And just having an ear, like I said, for me, it just sometimes if somebody's like, are you okay? And I'm like, can I just complain about my husband for a minute and it just doesn't go anywhere? And that'd be great. Like even something as simple as that. I mean, and it's hard when you're a leader because it's fewer people that you can connect with because you still need to lead your team. Gosh, another great podcast to do would be on the vulnerability of leaders and how that helps you with your team. By the way, it's great stuff. But so, Max, did you have any situations where you were having to be empathetic to a situation that you couldn't relate to?
I think probably the same thing as, the example that Kendra said, because I have my wife, I have my kid, feels, I still have company. I still, often see my parents in a safe environment. So I do have people that I connect with, but there are team members within the team that was lacking of that. So giving them, phone calls and doing Zoom meetings individually or in a team environment, definitely I feel like it helped that situation.
Well, it's summertime finally, and we're at a time where things are being lifted. So I'm pardon my golf analogy, but it's summer, so my head's in the golf place. So I'm curious, anybody need a mulligan? Anything that you would do over, looking back over the last year in leading large teams? Is there anything you'd do over or do a different way if you could?
Well, for one, I wouldn't have gotten the dog. Isn't that terrible? I would have done something else. I would have online shopping or something. I don't know. We would have figured something else.
Listen, let me tell you, like a year from now when you and I are talking about that dog's going to be the biggest mama's boy, and it's going to be you and the dog against the rest of the household. I just know it. I know it. He's going to be your biggest ally.
Probably right. But he's like 10 months now. So he's still he's still wreaking havoc at the house. But on a professional level, something that I would redo, I think that I would maybe have more communications with more of my peers, because I'm naturally a social person and I engage, and so I felt like a lot of people could talk to me and that sort of thing, but I don't lead all of the teams, you know what I mean? And so I think that for the senior managers and the managers who are leading these teams to show themselves as approachable, and not necessarily just on audit, but on tax. I know there was a lot of communication about, I just don't feel comfortable, and I just wish that we were ready. I wish that we kind of had built these relationships before this all ever happened so that it was more sincere and authentic. It's when you're not empathetic and you try to be, you can kind of tell, and then it's awkward and you're like, you're saying I can go home, but you don't mean it. It's kind of one of those things. And so I think that I wish that, this podcast came out before, and then that we could have talked about it and kind of built some of that trust and created those seamless avenues so that when things like this come up, there's like a really nice connection to be had.
It's interesting. And I can't recall what the term is, but there's a term for people who build their relationship going through war. When you go into battle together, we maybe didn't know each other before, but the bond that you have because you went through that battle together and how it's a strong bond. It's interesting. And I love that perspective because when I look back over the last year, you and I knew each other, but we certainly didn't start talking a lot until we kicked off the employee resource group and started talking. And you're definitely one of those people that I know I can send a gift to and we can laugh for a few minutes about movies or whatever. And it just makes me feel good, and I feel like I have a connection to somebody that I don't work with every single day. So I think that's a really good point, especially in public accounting where you have audit teams and tax teams, but you and Max are peers. And so although in some ways your experience leading teams in two different groups could be different, there's a lot in common in just having that connection to each other. What about you, Max? Any mulligans?
I think mine is somewhat similar. I was thinking that I should have reached out to more people outside of my team. I think I was too focusing on my team and making sure the team members are doing well, that I forgot about other people. And I often need to, be reminded that I need to reach out to others as well. And no matter, the other team members from the tax department or what Kendra said could be, outreach to the audit team because we are really one office, one firm. So we got to, care more about others people than, just focusing on one team.
I love that. And that's a really good point, especially for firms like us that are geographically spread out, is that, yeah, you have people either in your group or perhaps in Atlanta, but, there's thousands of other people in that CRI world. And one of the silver linings I have found from the pandemic, and I love, is that we've all embraced this virtual setting and using Zoom and all these video tools. And so it's enabled me to find ways to connect people together across offices who perhaps never would have met, never would have connected. And I get tickled when I hear that some of those connections are continuing. When somebody says, oh yeah, the other day, I was talking to Scott Bailey the other day, and he mentioned something and said, yeah, I was talking to Kendra. And I'm like, oh, are y'all working on an audit engagement together? He said, no. And I was like, that's the coolest thing. Like, I love that. So I do like that. So as we start to wind down and close, I'm curious. I always like to end on advice because it's usually great advice I could use. What advice do you have for leaders on how they can be more empathetic? Kendra, you made a good point a minute ago about being authentic. And both of you have talked about that and how to be an authentic leader. So any advice for other leaders?
I would say to get to know your peers and those that work for you, with you. I think that once you build those relationships, it just makes the whole work relationship so much better. It's nice to be able to say, hey, Max, how's your daughter? It's just nice to be able to put a personal touch on it. It helps with the work itself anyway. I think that it'll give you a better product. I think that they'll work harder for you. I think that there's plenty of people on my team where I'm like, hey, we really got to get this done, and they're like, oh, no problem, because we have a great relationship, and I would do the same for them, and so it's kind of a mutual respect. And so I would definitely say to get to know your team and build those relationships, and I think it'll take you so far for sure.
Well, I really appreciate y'all's time today. It was a great discussion. And I think, once the pandemic is in the rearview mirror, which it's starting to be, I guess it's in our side view mirrors now, but I'll be glad when I can barely see it in my rearview mirror. Empathetic leadership is so important, and understanding what that is and being authentic with it. So again, Kendra, Max, I really appreciate both of you joining me today and sharing your perspective. And for everybody else, just remember, if somebody's in a hole, don't ask them what they're doing in the hole and tell them to get out. Instead, jump in the hole with them and say, let's get you out, or how can I help? Or as I got a new puppy around the same time Kendra got a new puppy. So oftentimes I'm saying, okay, I feel you, girl. I got a big puppy getting on my nerves too. Here's what I'm doing. Would that help you? And so finding somebody in a hole or in a crate and helping them get out is definitely the way to go. So again, I want to thank you both for joining me today. And for all of our listeners, thank you for joining It Figures, and go to cricpa.com to see more that we have coming up and a large library that we have recorded.
If you want more CRI insights or are interested in learning about our firm, please visit our website at cricpa.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of It Figures, the CRI podcast. You can subscribe to It Figures on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. If you liked what you heard today, please leave us a review.